Sorry about that interruption. Henry has strep throat, and so I'm taking care of him while also trying to take care of you. All right, so we're still in Act 5, Scene 2, and Scene 3 begins just after this, which is why the top of the page says Scene 3. So we're still in Act 5, Scene 2. Richmond has gave this first speech that we hear from him, right? It's a really encouraging, really horrible speech against Richard, right? But he's encouraging his friends to be courageous, his troops. He says we've gotten reinforcements. We are gonna beat Richard. We are only a day away from him. We've just got one war to fight, right? One bloody trial, and then we will have perpetual peace. Oxford says every man's conscience is 1,000 men to fight against this guilty homicide, right? So each one man who has been wronged by Richard is like 1,000 men, right? Herbert goes on to say, I doubt not, but that his friends will turn to us, right? So Herbert is saying that Richard's friends will betray him. And Blunt corrects him, and he says he has no friends, actually. But what are friends for fear? He only has people who fear him. And these people will leave him when he needs them most. And Richmond says, all for our advantage, then in God's name march, right? So they have true hope, flies with swallows' wings, and this hope makes kings into gods, right? And meaner creatures kings. And so this is supposed to be the turning of the tide, so to speak, in the play, Act 5, Scene 2. Let's move then to Act 5, Scene 3. Here we are in Bosworth Field, all right? This is where the fateful battle will take place, right? So I am going to go through this scene fairly quickly and just help you to figure out sort of what's going on here, okay? So Richard says, here, pitch our tent, even in Bosworth Field. And the soldiers pitch the tent, and Surrey looks sad, right? And he says, why? And Surrey says, oh, I'm better than I seem, right? Then they go and talk about what will happen, and Richard says, here I will lie tonight. But where tomorrow? Well, all's one for that, right? He's like, maybe things aren't going to go so well, right? Who knows how things will turn out? But I've got to deal with what's in front of me first, okay? So he says, how many people are there? What is the number of the traitors? They have 6,000 or 7,000 according to Norfolk. And Richard says, oh, well, we have triple that number, right? So 3 times the forces to Richmond's side. And he says also, the king's name is a tower of strength, right? Just the fact that I am fighting is going to make this a rout. We are gonna win because I'm here. My name is behind our forces, and that will be powerful, right? So Richard again is giving a lot of power to language. Okay. So then he goes on and says, like, let's get everything set up. Tomorrow is a busy day. We need to get some sleep. All right. Now, everyone exits. All right. And this is unusual here in that we don't get scene 4. Right? That's not true. So I'm going to erase that. We don't get scene 4. Instead, what we have is all of Richard's people go out as the Earl of Richmond and all these other people are coming in at the same time. Typically, when everyone who was on stage leaves the stage, that's a change of scene, but these people are entering and exiting basically at the same time, okay? So Richmond, who we've just met the scene before, comes in, and we get another nice speech from him, all right, which I'll read. The weary sun hath made a golden set, and by the bright track of his fiery car gives token of a goodly day tomorrow. This is like the thing that you might have heard before, like red sky at night, sailor's delight, right? It's like the weather will be good tomorrow, things like that. And so this red and gold sky, right, is lucky for Richmond, at least as far as he is claiming, right? The sky is a good omen there, okay? So he says, Sir William Brandon, you shall bear my standard. Give me some ink and paper in my tent. I'll draw the form and model of our battle. So he's going to make plans, okay? On down the page, he says, you bear my good nights away to someone else. Where are you quartered? Do you know? He's preparing, right? And he gives a note to someone. And by the end, he says, good night, good Captain Blunt. Good Blunt exits. Come, gentlemen, let us consult upon tomorrow's business, right? In my tent. The dew is raw and cold. So Richmond doesn't go straight to bed. He also doesn't just send everybody else off to do his work. He's part of the planning for the battle, all right? Now, we have this exit and entrance yet again. A change of people in the scene. So we have Richard and Catesby here with a few others. Richard says, what time is it, right? What is the clock? It's supper time, my lord. It's 9 o'clock. And Richard says, I will not sup tonight. Give me some ink and paper. And so you can see that this matches what we've just seen from Richmond. And then he asks about his armor and his other armaments, right? So his armor and then the other pieces that make up his armor. That's what this beaver is. It's a beaver skin. Is my beaver easier than it was? Does it fit better? And all my armor laid into my tent. And Catesby says, it is. All things were in readiness. And so they choose sentinels. Richard says, stir with the lark tomorrow, right? Wake up early and get ready for... No, dear. Sorry. I'm not sure if you heard that. Anyway, all right. So he's telling everyone to get ready for tomorrow. And he sees that Lord Northumberland is melancholy. The Earl of Surrey is also feeling this way, right? But they've been cheering up the soldiers, okay? So they are helping people to feel better about tomorrow, right? So Richard is called for ink and paper, and he says basically, like, leave me alone. And here we get the implied stage direction that Richard sleeps in his tent, guarded by soldiers. So then we have, again, an exit and an entrance, okay? Stanley has come to talk to Richmond in his tent. Stanley says, fortune and victory sit on thy helm. Thy helm is like a crown, right? Richmond says, all comfort that the dark night can afford be to thy person, noble father-in-law. How is our mother, right? So he goes on, and Stanley gives Richmond his blessing, and Richmond says, okay, now I'm going to go to sleep. You guys leave me alone. Tomorrow's going to be great, but I'm going to go to sleep now. So all but Richmond leaves, and Richmond stays, okay? Richmond kneels here, and he's praying. This is important, all right? He prays before he goes to sleep. We don't see that Richard did that, right? And so I'm going to highlight important parts in his prayer. O thou. Thou is a form of friendly address to God. You is more formal than thee or thou, all right? O thou, whose captain I account myself, you are my captain, God, he says. Look on my forces with a gracious eye, right? Put in their hands thy bruising irons of wrath, that they may crush down with a heavy fall the usurping helmets of our adversaries. It's not my wrath, it's thy wrath, right? So in some ways, Richmond here is saying, not my will be done, but thy will be done. Make us thy ministers of chastisement, that we may praise thee in the victory. To thee do I commend my watchful soul, ere I let fall the windows of my eyes. And so this is what I just told you a second before. He's praying, whereas Richard didn't, right? And so in some ways, this prayer protects him in what's to come. Sleeping and waking, he says, "Oh, to God, defend me still." And then he goes to sleep. All right. So here now we have the ghosts. This is one of my favorite scenes in the entire play. And I'm going to switch to green here. I'm sorry about I'm not paying attention to what I'm doing. So the ghost of Edward comes to Richard. It's Prince Edward, son to Harry VI. Okay, so this is the wife of Queen Anne. Earlier. So Edward says to Richard here, right? "Let me sit heavy on thy soul tomorrow. Think how thou stabbedst me in my prime of youth at Tewkesbury. Despair, therefore, and die." But to Richmond, the same ghost says, "Be cheerful, Richmond, for the wronged souls of butchered princes fight in thy behalf. King Henry's issue, Richmond, comforts thee." Right? And so we have exactly what the Duchess said earlier, right? Let the spirits of your enemies weigh upon you, right? Let the spirits of those people you've killed weigh upon you, and let them bring victory to your enemies, right? So here we have the ghost of Henry VI, all right? Henry VI says, "When I was mortal, my anointed body by thee was punched full of deadly holes. Think on the Tower and me, despair and die," right? But to Richmond, he says, "Virtuous and holy, be thou conqueror," right? Harry has prophesied that thou shalt be king. Let this comfort thee in thy sleep, okay? Then down the page, right? Clarence comes to Richard and says, "Despair and die." He comes to Richmond and says, "Live and flourish." Okay? And this pattern is going to continue on and on. The ghosts of Rivers, Grey, and Vaughan come in and say horrible things to Richard, but to Richmond, right, they say, "Conquer him, win the day." Okay? Then we have the two young princes. The young princes say to Richard, "Dream on thy cousins smothered in the Tower. Let us be led within thy bosom and weigh thee down to ruin," exactly as the Duchess of York said. Okay? And to Richmond, they say, "Sleep in peace." I'm sorry, that should be blue. They say, "Sleep in peace, wake in joy." Okay? And the ghost of Hastings comes and does the same thing. The ghost of Anne comes and does the same thing to Richmond. She says, "The adversary's wife doth pray for thee." Finally, we get the ghost of Buckingham, and he's the last person to have died, right? We saw him on the scaffold at the beginning of this act. And so to Richard, he says quite plainly, "The first I was that helped thee to the crown, the last was I that felt thy tyranny." Oh, think on Buckingham, right? Die in terror. And he ends by saying, keep dreaming of these terrible things, right? Keep dreaming of bloody deeds and death, despair, right? To Richmond, conversely, he says, "I died for hope ere I could lend the aid." Like I was trying, right? But it didn't work out. But cheer thy heart, be not dismayed. God and angels fight on Richmond's side. And so then we get Richard waking up out of the dream. Richard and Richmond are both visible on stage at this point. They're both in their tents. They're both in their beds. But Richmond is sound asleep, and Richard has started up out of his dream. And he's been dreaming of battle, right? "Soft, I did but dream. O coward conscience, how thou dost affect me. Cold fearful drops stand on my trembling flesh." He's been sweating in his dream, right? And so he says, he goes through the things he's dreamed. We know what has caused him to dream this because we can see the ghost talking. But he goes through the dream itself, right? They all cry, "Guilty, guilty." There is no creature loves me, and if I die, no soul will pity me. Like, he's not far from the truth, right? And so he says, Methought the souls of all that I had murdered came to my tent, and every one did threat tomorrow's vengeance on the head of Richard. And so Ratcliffe comes in, and, they're like, oh, it's morning, right? And Richard says, I feared a fearful dream. Do you think our friends will prove true? And Ratcliffe says, like, of course they will. It's going to be fine, right? Then they both leave. Richmond has been asleep this whole time, right? Then the lords go into Richmond's tent and say good morrow, and they wake him. And he says, oh my goodness, I slept the sweetest sleep with the fairest dreams that ever entered in a drowsy head. I've been asleep just so nicely all night because methought the souls whose bodies Richard murdered came to my tent and cried on victory. He says, my soul is jocund. My soul is happy, right? In French, the Mona Lisa is called La Joconde, the happy one, right? In the remembrance of so fair a dream. And he says, like, what time is it, right? Like, let's get ready. Let's go to war. This is the curse that Richard's mother laid upon him coming back to both Richmond and Richard. For Richmond, it's a blessing. For Richard, it's a curse.